The Vithara Imperium did not fear young civilizations. They cataloged them, they monitored them. Occasionally, when a species grew inconvenient faster than anticipated, they removed them, cleanly, efficiently, without ceremony. It was not cruelty. Cruelty implied emotion. What the Imperium practiced was something colder and far more dangerous. It was policy. High Warlord Sarath Kale stood at the center of the command throne aboard the Eternal Dominance, the Imperium's oldest and most decorated warship, and studied the holographic sphere rotating before him. The blue-green world at its center pulsed softly with the electromagnetic signature of a civilization moving too fast for comfort. "Summary?" he said. Fleet Executor Lindara stepped forward, her silver armor catching the blue light of the projection. In 11 standard years, the human species has expanded from a single inhabited world to 19 active colony systems. They've reverse-engineered our border beacon frequencies and begun transmitting coded interference. 3 Imperium survey vessels reported weapons lock from human craft in the Orvith corridor. Most recently, she paused, they destroyed an unmanned Imperium observation platform and left no debris. They took it apart, Warlord, kept the pieces. Sarath's expression did not shift. They are collecting samples. Yes. Silence moved through the chamber like a slow tide. Around the circular war table, senior commanders stood at attention, waiting for the word they knew was coming. The Vithara Imperium had issued that word 26 times in recorded history. 26 civilizations had heard it. None had survived long enough to hear it a second time. "Deploy the World Breaker Seed," Sarath said. The device in question was not large. That was its elegance. It measured roughly 4 meters in diameter, a matte black sphere studded with sensor nodes and wrapped in concentric rings of self-sealing armor plating. Inside its core existed a colony of engineered nanotech assemblers, dormant until triggered, designed to penetrate planetary crust at the atomic level and destabilize the magnetic field architecture that held a world together from the inside. The process took 72 hours once initiated. The result was total geological collapse, not an explosion, but an unraveling, a planet that simply stopped holding itself together. No known species had found a defense. Most had never identified the device before impact. Those who had identified it had spent their remaining hours attacking it with everything they possessed, which was precisely the wrong approach. Kinetic trauma accelerated the nanotech assembler's dormancy release. The Worldbreaker seed was launched from beyond the outer edge of humanity's detection range. It traveled on a low-emission drift trajectory, mimicking debris. Its approach would register as a rogue asteroid until it crossed inside lunar orbit. Or so Fleet Executor Lendara had assured the Warlord. Dr. Sarah Voss had not slept in 31 hours when the alert reached her terminal. She was chief theoretical physicist at the Unified Earth Advanced Systems Laboratory, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Atacama Desert, and she had spent the better part of the last decade working on what her colleagues politely called optimistic problems, theoretical frameworks for technology that humanity did not yet have the raw materials or understanding to build. She worked on them anyway, because someone had to think 10 steps ahead. She was in the middle of recalculating gravitational resonance patterns in compressed matter fields when the priority message arrived from the orbital detection grid. She read it once, read it again. Then she stood up from her chair, walked to the coffee machine in the corner of her lab, poured a cup she did not drink, and said to no one in particular, "There it is." 40 minutes later, she was on a military transport ascending toward the Athena Station High Command platform in geostationary orbit, where General Tobias Marsh stood before a display screen with the expression of a man trying very hard not to show how frightened he was. "Rogue asteroid profile," he said as she entered, "but the spectrometry is wrong. Composition doesn't match anything in the Outer Belt catalog, and it's not tumbling." "No," Voss agreed, steadying the feed. "It's not an asteroid." Can we destroy it? She set down her undrunk coffee on a nearby console. General, I need you to listen to me very carefully before you do anything. That object is not just a weapon, it is the most sophisticated piece of nanotechnology ever detected in human history. Whatever is inside that casing is operating at a scale of engineering we have never achieved. If we blow it apart, we get shrapnel. If we leave it alone, we lose Earth. She turned to look at him directly. But if we catch it, we get an education. Marsh stared at her. You want to catch an alien planet killer. I want to catch the most advanced piece of alien engineering we have ever encountered, she said, before it kills us all. Yes. The meeting that followed lasted 4 hours. It involved 17 senior commanders, 3 heads of state patched in via encrypted relay, and 1 long stretch of silence after Voss presented her full analysis of the object's likely internal architecture, drawn entirely from external readings, theoretical extrapolation, and what she described entirely without irony as an educated guess. The argument against the plan was obvious. The risk of premature activation during any capture attempt was catastrophic. The argument for it was simpler. They had no confirmed method of destroying the device without triggering exactly that outcome. We attack it visibly, hard enough to look desperate. We target the outer plating, areas we already know are non-critical. We make it look like we're trying to crack it open. Meanwhile, the real operation moves behind that noise. General Marsh looked at the projection for a long moment. And the real operation? Voss pulled up a secondary schematic. The Persephone platform, a deep space construction rig currently docked at Lagrange Point 4, equipped with magnetic tethering arrays originally designed for redirecting nickel-iron asteroids into mining orbits. We don't blow it up, she said. We catch it, and then we take it apart one atom at a time and figure out how it works. There was another long silence. Begin immediate refit of the Persephone platform, Marsh said at last, and get me a fleet deployment plan that looks like we're losing. The performance lasted 3 days. Human warships engaged the incoming object at range, firing rail batteries in patterns that looked frantic and achieved nothing of consequence. Missiles detonated against outer armor plating in visible blooms of fire. Emergency broadcasts transmitted across open channels carried exactly the right amount of fear in them, enough to be believable, not enough to convey complete collapse. In the Vithara command vessel, observing from beyond the edge of human sensor range, the intelligence reports painted a satisfying picture. Human fleet response is disorganized, reported Sensor Chief Vane. Rail strikes are achieving armor degradation of less than 2% per engagement cycle. No evidence of structural threat to core architecture. The species is attempting conventional kinetic removal. It will not succeed. High Warlord Sarath watched and said nothing for a long time. Then, mark the behavioral pattern for the archive. It may be useful when processing other species later. He did not watch the following 16 hours of engagement footage closely. He should have. On the 3rd day, at a precisely calculated moment in the device's terminal approach phase, the Persephone platform broke from its holding position and accelerated on a trajectory that appeared, at first, to be an emergency collision course, another desperate human attempt to physically block impact. The Vithara's automated tactical systems registered it as sacrificial interference, expected, insignificant. The platform's tethering arrays activated at a distance of 40 meters. The magnetic grapples were not designed for a target moving at this velocity. Voss's engineering team had spent 72 consecutive hours recalibrating every parameter of the system. The first array locked. The second failed and was bypassed by a redundant coupling designed specifically for this moment. The third and fourth locked in sequence. The Persephone platform fired its correction thrusters at full capacity. For 11 seconds, nothing appeared to happen. Then the Worldbreaker seed's trajectory shifted. Not by much, not visibly on casual observation, but 4 degrees of arc, maintained over the remaining distance to Earth, meant the difference between impact and a new orbital path. "Capture confirmed," said the voice of Navigator Chen over the operations channel, in a tone so calm it sounded almost like boredom. In her observation post aboard Athena Station, Sarah Voss looked at the telemetry reading, let out a single long breath, and said, "All right, now the real work begins." The device was towed to a secure orbital containment ring constructed from decommissioned shipyard frames over the following 18 hours. Armed response teams surrounded it. Radiation monitors reported baseline readings. The nanotech assemblers within the core remained dormant. They had not been triggered. The armor had not been breached. The device was intact, functional, captured, and utterly, completely in human hands. General Marsh stood beside Voss on the observation platform and looked at it through the reinforced viewport. "It came here to erase us," he said quietly. "Yes," Voss agreed. "And now?" She studied the alien device for a long moment. Its surface was extraordinary, not smooth, but not rough either, structured at a scale between those two things, like the skin of something alive. She had spent 3 days analyzing it from a distance, and every hour of analysis had only confirmed what her first look had told her. Whoever built this was smarter than humanity was right now. Right now being the critical phrase. "Now," she said, "we find out what it can teach us." She turned toward the airlock access corridor and pulled on her engineering gloves, starting with the shell. The first thing Sarah Voss learned was that the Vithara were perfectionists. The second thing she learned was that perfectionists had blind spots. The Worldbreaker seed's outer casing was constructed from a composite alloy that had no equivalent in human materials science, a layered structure in which each stratum served a different function: outer impact dispersion, mid-layer thermal management, inner electromagnetic shielding, and a final membrane that behaved less like metal and more like a living system, repairing microscopic fractures in real time through a lattice of embedded assembler chains separate from the weapon's primary payload. It was the most advanced passive defense architecture humanity had ever studied, and it had one flaw. "It's optimized," said Dr. Ren Okolo, Voss's materials lead, on the second day of analysis. He was standing at a holographic rendering of the alloy cross-section, rotating it slowly with 2 fingers. "Every layer is exactly as thick as it needs to be. Every assembler chain is exactly as dense as required. There is no redundancy, no margin for the unexpected. They built this to a specification, and the specification assumes they anticipated every possible scenario." Voss looked at the rendering. "They didn't anticipate being caught." "No," Okolo zoomed into the inner electromagnetic membrane, "and they didn't anticipate someone trying to improve it." By day 3, the nanotech core was the subject of the most concentrated scientific effort in human history. 600 researchers across orbital platforms and ground-based labs worked in coordinated rotation. The core assemblers were still dormant. Their activation protocol required a specific impact pressure trigger that had never been applied. Around that dormant core, human engineers built a secondary containment architecture, then a tertiary one, not because they were afraid, though they were, but because each layer of containment also served as an observation platform, giving them finer and finer resolution data on what was happening inside the seed. What was happening inside was extraordinary. The nanotech assemblers did not simply break down matter, they reorganized it. The dissolution effect on a planetary core was a consequence of reorganization without purpose. The assemblers had no template to build toward, so they dismantled the existing structure without replacement. The planet unraveled because the assemblers were given nothing constructive to do. Voss stared at that finding for a long time. Then she called Okolo, and then General Marsh, and then she requested emergency access to the xenobiology team that had been working in parallel on the assembler's programming architecture. "They can build," she said when everyone was assembled. "The Vithara programs them to destroy because that was the assignment, but the underlying capacity is construction. We've been looking at this as a weapon. It is a weapon, but the mechanism is a manufacturing system. Marsh's expression was careful. You're saying we can reprogram it? I'm saying they gave us a factory and told it to burn everything down, Voss said. And I'm saying we can tell it to do something else. The reprogramming effort took 4 days. It was not simple. The assembler architecture was deeply alien, written in a logic system that bore no resemblance to any human coding language and had to be reverse translated through 3 layers of theoretical framework before it became something human engineers could interact with. 14 people worked on nothing else. They ate at their stations. 2 of them cried at various points, from exhaustion and from wonder in equal measure. But on the evening of the 4th day, a single isolated assembler colony, extracted, contained, and operating in a sealed test environment the size of a shoebox, received a new instruction set. It built a crystal lattice from raw silicon substrate. Clean, precise, structured at the molecular level in a configuration that would have taken human fabrication technology 6 hours to approximate. The assembler colony did it in 40 seconds. Voss watched the readout and felt something she could not immediately name. It took her a moment to identify it as the specific sensation of standing at the edge of an era. Full reprogramming of primary core begins tomorrow, she said. Simultaneously, I want the propulsion array redesigned. The Vithara propulsion system embedded in the Worldbreaker seed was elegant but conservative. It had been engineered for one purpose: deliver the device to a target without interception. Speed was prioritized, maneuverability was secondary. The curvature field drive at its heart operated on fixed oscillation intervals, reliable, powerful, and entirely predictable once you understood the pattern. Human experimental warp research had been working on curvature field theory for 12 years without a working prototype. Now they had a working prototype, captured intact, and a team of engineers who had spent a week learning to read its blueprints. They did not copy it. Copying it would have been the cautious choice, and Voss had made a decision on the day of the capture that caution was no longer the operating principle. She asked her propulsion team one question: where did they leave efficiency on the table? The answer, as Akolo had suggested about the alloy, was in the margins. The Vithara had built to specification. They had not explored the boundary conditions of their own technology, because why would they? The Worldbreaker seed was already more than sufficient for its task. Sufficiency did not require optimization. Human engineers spent 48 hours pushing past sufficiency into obsession. The modified propulsion array introduced variable frequency curvature oscillation, irregular pulses that allowed the drive to adapt to local gravitational conditions rather than operating on a fixed output. Energy bleed dropped by 38%. Maximum velocity increased. More importantly, the system became capable of precision micro-adjustments at full thrust, something the original design had never attempted. The device could now maneuver at speed with the finesse of a surgical instrument. It was on the 6th day, when the reprogrammed core and the redesigned propulsion array had both been integrated and tested, that Voss allowed herself to stand back and look at what had been built. The outer armor had been reinforced at the stress points identified during the initial performance assault. Micro-thruster clusters for fine vectoring had been added. The electromagnetic membrane had been replicated and layered, adding passive defense without adding significant mass. The internal assembler colony had a new primary instruction set: constructive, targeted, reprogrammable in the field via coded transmission. And the yield mechanism, the core destabilization trigger, had been replaced entirely with a gravitic lensing array that could focus the assembler output outward in a directed beam rather than releasing it omnidirectionally. The device no longer destroyed indiscriminately. It could build, or it could, with a command change, do something considerably more serious to a specific target while leaving everything around that target intact. It was not a planet killer anymore. It was something more unsettling than that. General Marsh stood beside Voss looking at the completed device in its containment ring, and his voice when he finally spoke was very quiet. "What do we call it?" Voss thought about it for a moment. "We don't," she said. "We just send it back." The transmission was short. It was encoded into a signal burst attached to the outgoing device's transponder, broadcast on a frequency the Vithara used for command authentication, which humanity had been quietly studying since the incident with the observation platform 3 years earlier. "You sent this to erase us. We are returning it. We have improved the propulsion system, the armor, the yield mechanism, and the primary payload architecture. The assemblers now build instead of destroy, unless instructed otherwise. We understand if this is alarming. It should be. We learned everything we needed from your engineering. We will continue learning. If you send another lesson, we will study that one too. Consider carefully what you choose to teach us next." The device launched from Earth orbit on a Tuesday morning, its modified propulsion array activated, and the curvature pulse drive fired in its new variable frequency mode. Irregular, adaptive, fast. It left the solar system's detection envelope in a fraction of the time the original inbound journey had required. It passed through the dead Vithara colony system of Orath 7 on its outbound path, a world the Imperium had used as a proving ground and left lifeless 4 centuries earlier. As it passed within range, a short-burst assembler deployment was initiated by coded command from Earth. 40,000 assembler units dispersed across the surface of Orath 7. They had 48 hours of instruction time before the device moved beyond relay range. In that time, they planted the atmospheric seed structures for a nitrogen-oxygen cycle. They restructured 300 square kilometers of dead regolith into viable soil substrate. They did not finish the job. 48 hours was not enough for that. But when Vithara deep-range sensors swept the system 2 weeks later, they found a dead world in the early stages of becoming something else. No human vessel had entered the system. No human team had set foot on the surface, just a passing device, a brief transmission, in 48 hours of construction. High Warlord Sereth Kale received the full intelligence report in silence. He read it once. Then he had Sensor Chief Vane summarize the key points aloud, not because he had failed to understand, but because he needed to hear it spoken in a living voice to confirm that it was real. "The device has been returned," Vane said. "Modified. Performance exceeds original specifications across all measurable parameters. The assembler payload has been reprogrammed from dissolution to construction. Orath 7 is showing early atmospheric development consistent with deliberate terraforming. The transmission received on command frequencies indicates the humans are aware of our coding protocols." Sereth said nothing. Warlord, Fleet Executor Lynn Dara said carefully, "They built it better, in 11 days. Sereth stood very still for a long time. "Recall all border enforcement assets to interior positions," he said at last. "And the second Worldbreaker seed?" Dara asked. "The one in reserve preparation?" Sereth looked at the holographic sphere of Earth rotating slowly in the projection field. The blue-green world with its white clouds and metallic orbital rings, a young species expanding too quickly, a species that had been handed the most advanced weapon in the Imperium's arsenal as a means of their extinction, and had spent 11 days making it into something better. "Stand it down," he said quietly. He turned away from the projection. "I will not teach them again."